directions. The less important one is the kind that we have just mentioned, the rationalization, explanation, and adornment of the sacred by the profane. That is, the less important one is the movement of how Chol affects Kodesh. Far more significant and consequential is the radiation of Kodesh towards Chol. That is the movement of Kodesh, of the holiness, to what one would imagine to be profane. Ennobling it, raising it to the loftiest levels, sanctifying it, impregnating it with meaning and purpose. In the area of Torah Yisrael, we also disagree with the meaning of what is commonly referred to as Dat Torah. Das Torah. Literally, that means the knowledge of Torah. Let me lay it out for you. We would, of course, disagree with those in the Orthodox Rite who understand Dat Torah as a quasi-form of Ruach HaKodesh. Rabbi Bernard Weinberger seems to support this position. Let's take a look at number 2. He wrote this in the Jewish Observer, Dat Torah is a special endowment or capacity to penetrate objective reality, recognize the facts as they really are, and, there's a mistype here, and apply the pertinent halachic principles. It is a form of Ruach HaKodesh, as it were, which borders, if only remotely, on the periphery of prophecy. He's talking post-Shoah. And what he's saying here is that the rabbis have almost quasi-prophetic power. Let me read to you from the works of the great Rabbi Eliyahu Desla in his Michtav Eliyahu, a work that has had a profound impact upon my life. Although here, I respectfully disagree with what he has written and with what I'm about ready to share with you. He writes in Michtav Eliyahu in his first volume the following: whoever was present at their meetings, and he's talking about the rabbis of the Orthodox Rite, the Chafetz Chaim, Reb Chaim Briska, and Reb Chaim Ozer. Even that is a loaded term, because I would say that some of these individuals I would not categorize as being in the Orthodox Rite. Certainly not Reb Chaim Briska or the Chafetz Chaim. But he's talking about the Orthodox Rite. He doesn't mention their names. I bracketed that. I think those choices are a bit sloppy. But he's talking about the rabbis of the Orthodox Rite community could have no doubt that he could see the Shekhinah. What does Shekhinah mean? The indwelling, God himself resting on the work of their hands, and that the Holy Spirit was present in their assemblies. Our rabbis have told us to listen to the words of the sages, even if they tell us that right is left, and not to say, heaven forbid, that they certainly erred, because little I can see their error with my own eyes. Rather, my seeing is null and void, compared with the clarity of intellect and the divine aid they receive. This is the Torah view, Das Torah, concerning faith in the sages, Emunah b'chachamim, Emunat hachachamim. The absence of self-negation towards our rabbis is the root of all sin and the beginning of all destruction, while all merits are as naught compared with the root of all, faith in the sages. And that writing is not an anomaly. There is a sense out there that those in that group have this quasi-prophetic power. But even for those on the Orthodox Rite who do not relate to Dat Torah as a quasi-form of prophecy, they maintain that the views of their rabbinic leaders must be followed without question, even in non-halachic areas. There are areas that are pure halakha, there are other areas that I would categorize as not being pure halacha, but as being areas of public policy. And there are those on the Orthodox right who would say, maybe our rabbis do not speak with a quasi-prophetic power. Still, what they say goes in all areas, not only in the area of pure Torah, but in the area of public policy. We in the modern Orthodox camp also revere the wisdom of our great rabbinic authorities. But in non-halachic areas, our rabbis recognize their limitations and advise us to seek out experts in the area. Like Rabbi Soloveitchik. When the activist, as a young activist, when we approached Rabbi Soloveitchik and we asked him, does public protest work to help Soviet Jewry? I will never forget his response. He said, seek out a Sovietologist. Seek out a Sovietologist, find out what he says. I remember taking Avital Sharansky for a private meeting with Rabbi Soloveitchik. And she went to Rabbi Soloveitchik for advice. And Rabbi Soloveitchik looked up and he turned to her and he said, why don't you seek out Pip? I know Pip. And I was thinking, who's Pip? Who's Pip? And then it hit me. The Rav was from Boston and he just had it slightly wrong. It wasn't Pip, but seek out Tip. Tip O'Neill. Tip O'Neill. He's in the Congress. He knows much more about this stuff. He knows about the pressure on the Soviets that would work or that wouldn't work. It's a very glaring differences. And indeed, our different approaches to Dat Torah, especially surfaced in the Soviet Jewry struggle. Following the Dat Torah of their rabbis, the Orthodox right opposed public protest, insisting that the only way to help oppressed Jewry was through quiet diplomacy. And despite the decrees of these Gedolim, the modern Orthodox community ignored their decisions and were in the vanguard of public protest. It's not that we didn't believe that quiet diplomacy wasn't effective. In fact, we knew it was effective. But we recognized from Sovietologists that the engine of quiet diplomacy was very much dependent on public protest. And Sovietologists today acknowledge the crucial role that public protest played in gaining the freedom of Soviet Jewry. In fact, the Orthodox right has been by and large wrong on three of the greatest challenges facing Am Yisrael in the 20th century. Many were wrong during the Shoah when, in fact, they told their people not to leave Poland. Perhaps most famously were the words of the Belzer Rebbe. And the Belzer Rebbe left Hungary in January or February of 1944. He was in Hungary. And his Hasidim were concerned. Perhaps he's leaving because he recognizes that the future for Hungarian Jewry was a dark future. And his reaction was very strong. He said, I am not leaving because I am fearful of what will happen here. As a matter of fact, the future in Hungary is very good. I am leaving for proactive reasons because I've always dreamt of making Aliyah. And he gave a drasha, and we have the drasha. In the drasha, he quotes the blessings of Jacob to one of his sons, Yisachar, and he interprets the blessing as follows. Vayar menucha ki tov lo v'et ha'aretz ki na'ema. That he saw that the resting place, that it was good, and the land, that it was pleasant. And this was his drasha. Vayar menucha, and he saw that it was a resting place. Shahat Sadiq ro'eh shetishre po letoshavei medina zot menucha v'shalva. The righteous one sees, the drasha was actually given by his brother, but in his name, the tzaddik sees that rest and tranquility will descend upon the inhabitants of this land of Hungary. Kitov, שהצדיק רואה כי טוב וחוטוב ואך טוב החסד ידוף ישיג אחינו בני ישראל בני מדינה זו. That it was good that tzaddik sees that good and only good and grace will pursue and befall our Jewish brethren, the inhabitants of this land. Ve'et haaretz ki na'ema, and the land that it was pleasant. Zot asher ava lemoshav lo la'alot la'aretz hibitam ki na'ema mahmat ki sham shoreh noam ha'elyon. The reason he wants to go on Aliyah is because the place of spiritual delight is in fact Israel. It didn't take long. Maybe a month later, after he left, there started the roundup of Hungarian Jews. And today, if you look into the Belzer archives and you read the drasha of the Belzer Rebbe, you will find that there are 22 lines of that drasha that are deleted. It's those 22 lines. Now, I say this with great deference to the Belzer Rebbe, because I think that his kavanah was only positive. He was a man of extraordinary greatness, a man of extraordinary piety, but he was wrong. He was wrong on the future of Hungarian Jewry. And the reality is that the Orthodox Right, they were wrong and often were late in coming to the support of the newly established State of Israel. And as I've pointed out, they were wrong, in fact, on Soviet Jewry relative to public protest. Even in purely halachic areas, we part company in our understanding of Dat Torah. For the Orthodox Right, Dat Torah means that decisions made by the rabbis close off all discussions. All discussions. In modern Orthodoxy, on the other hand, it sets the foundation from which discussion ensues. Let's take a look at number 3, the words of a colleague of mine with whom I studied in high school. He was my chavruta, Dr. Lawrence Kaplan. He writes, while psak, that means the decision-making of the rabbis, always leaves room for more discussion, for more analysis, and for responsible criticism, the whole purpose of Dat Torah is to close off and suppress discussion. It enables one person or one group to impose ex cathedra a personal, particular viewpoint on all persons, on all groups, and no questions asked. In sum, for the modern Orthodox community, if Dat Torah means to revere the wisdom of our great rabbinic authorities, like Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik of blessed memory, we believe in it. We believe in it. If, however, it means to follow blindly the great rabbinic authorities in non-halachic areas, or to close off discussion in purely halachic areas, we profoundly disagree. We respect Rabbi Soloveitchik's Dat Torah precisely because he was a person of enormous human wisdom and insight. He understood that Dat Torah was not to be imposed, that it was to be persuasive rather than authoritarian. The bottom line is that the Orthodox Right believes in the centralization of rabbinic authority. Now, that approach has its positives. As one could argue, it serves as a check on rabbis who act improperly. But it has a negative. Quite simply, power corrupts. And a great deal of power corrupts greatly. The modern Orthodox approach is that post